so that people can watch it if they weren't able to make it with us today. I see some old friends, some new friends, and some people I don't know coming in on the chat and joining the call. I am not going to be monitoring the chat function just because I think it's going to be too much with all my talking. So I'm going to turn the chat off now, but I'm really hello to everyone that I do know and all my new friends and my, former colleagues and friends, and it's good to see that you've joined us today. So we're up to 118. I want to start by just a quick land acknowledgement. It's really tricky when we're running a national program, but I'm in Toronto right now, and so just want to acknowledge the beautiful spring day. We have some sun shining here in Toronto, which is welcome because it's been raining and windy for the last few days here. We're on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit. It's home to the Dish with One Spoon treaty, and of course lots of other different treaties and teachings that have taken place. It's the traditional meeting grounds of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis, the Huron-Wendat peoples, and it's still, of course, a major gathering point for meeting and trade and commerce and those pieces today. And I just want to put out an acknowledgement to the territory that each of you are on today. We're in a crazy time right now with COVID, and I hope that all of you and your families are as safe as you possibly can be, and that I wish wellness for each of you in that. Thought I'd do a quick introduction of the team that's supporting us with the Indigenous Innovation Initiative and with this webinar today. So this information is all on our website. I'm not going to make you read more, but this is our team. So Layla is the one that is monitoring the Indigenous Innovation moderator host. And so she's going to be available and she's monitoring the questions along with Pierce and Marissa from our team to make sure that we can answer your questions. There's going to be a couple of options for answering your questions. There is going to be a Q&A at the end. I think that we're going to try and get through this agenda as quickly as we can so that we can have as much time as possible for the questions that you might have that come up that don't get answered in the webinar. And so Pierce, Layla, and Marissa are going to monitor those questions as they come in. You can either message them through the chat function directly to the whole group, or you can message them directly to the Indigenous Innovation host, who will kind of keep track of the questions and then will come up at the end. And there's also, if you prefer to be even more anonymous, Layla put the SurveyMonkey link at the very top of the chat function. And so you can use that chat function or that SurveyMonkey to ask questions, and she'll be monitoring that during the course of the event as well. And then that process of registering on Flux, you're a little bit more familiar with it, might be a step ahead, but that's our platform for keeping track of all of the applications. And so he's going to come on at some point and just do a quick overview of how to apply, how to register, and then how to fill in your application, and showing us those steps. I'm going to try not to say too much, but I think my nerves are still getting a little bit of the best of me right now. Also, actually, just to go back, there was an invitation. Of course, I'm from Toronto, as I mentioned, and our team is based in Toronto. But we would love to hear from all of you about where you're from. And so please do put into the chat what part of the country or what part of Turtle Island you're messaging us from. Because we're super curious to know how wide our reach has been, and just also to just connect with you as much as we can in this large of a scale. So we're going to break the webinar down into kind of 4 sections. I'm going to do a very quick overview of what the Indigenous Innovation Initiative is, who Grand Challenges is, and just talk about this specific program. So we can just do a quick overview there. I'm going to spend the bulk of the time talking about the application and the selection process, and go over some of those key pieces that you can see on the slide around like definitions, the key documents, how to apply. This is where Eric is going to come in and give us a short tutorial on the Flex platform. Talk about some specific details that I know that there's some questions that have been coming up that we've seen in social media and people that have messaged members of our team directly about. I'm going to talk about what that review process is going to look like and just remind everyone of some of the key dates. And then I'll briefly touch on what the next steps are for those who are invited to the full application process. And then again, like we said, we're going to leave the bulk of the time at the end, or as much time as possible at the end for questions and answers. So the Indigenous Innovation Initiative is a relatively new initiative within Grand Challenges Canada. It's an innovation platform. And so what that means is we provide seed funding to innovators to develop and test their innovations or their ideas. It was started with this idea. It was going to spark community-led Indigenous innovation. Indigenous peoples have always known how to be innovative. The very fact of our existence demonstrates that we've always known how to innovate pre-contact and even since contact. And this community-led innovation can spark everything from health innovation, social innovation, to economic innovations, and address some of those challenges that are in our community. Our vision at I3, as we adoringly call ourselves, the 3 I's or I3, is our vision is to improve people's lives through Indigenous innovation. The platform itself is being incubated at Grand Challenges Canada. And Grand Challenges Canada is an innovation platform that's been working within this idea of innovation for impact and for the last 10 years. The majority of their work has been in the development space, working with innovators in low and middle income resource countries, largely around health, but also around water and other neat innovations. And again, they've got 10 years of expertise and infrastructure that's been developed to support how to run an innovation platform. They've been incredibly supportive of our initiative, which has been incubated to get to the point where we're launching this piece for not quite 2 years now. They also have a humanitarian pillar. And so the Indigenous pillar is one of 3 pillars that is working under the banner of Grand Challenges Canada. So again, it's a not-for-profit with this idea that it provides the funding to support innovations that will test bold ideas with the potential for big impact. Looking at how they can solve major health and social challenges in communities by innovators who are closest to those challenges. So this is not around coming in with a big idea and solving complex problems in another nation or another community, but working with communities to help them to identify what the challenges are and to identify those solutions and giving the supports to develop and test those ideas. We were going to share a few stories from Grand Challenges as well, and maybe I'll go back just quickly to just talk about a few of the innovations that have come out of Grand Challenges before the Indigenous Innovation Initiative was launched. Some of you might have heard about something called the Lucky Iron Fish, and that was an early innovation that Grand Challenges Canada supported. And what it is, basically, it was a block of iron, and someone identified that anemia was very prevalent within low and middle income resource countries with pregnant and breastfeeding women and mothers. And they wanted to support getting more absorbable iron so that we could resolve anemia, because of course it has lots of challenges and impacts for mom and also for the babies and children growing up. And so actually, if you put this chunk of iron into your food as it's cooking, it will absorb the iron, and you'll get dietary iron infused into whatever you're eating, and that helps to treat and prevent anemia. And so that was an innovation that was developed and tested early on with the Grand Challenges funding. And they also were able to help scale that innovation to the point where now they have their product that they transformed into, from a block of iron into a fish, because it was found that fish was often identified as something that was, a source of prosperity and wellness and health and goodness. And more people were likely to use it if it was in the shape of a fish than just a block. But it also, they made it accessible in more well-resourced countries like in Canada for people with anemia here to be able to use. And they use the profits and the revenues that they generate in their larger operation of sales in the West to invest into how they can make it more accessible in low and middle income resource countries and scaled it to other countries around the world. So that's one of the kinds of innovations that Grand Challenges has funded. Another one was in their global mental health initiative. And so they have a Grand Challenges in global mental health program. And one of the innovators was a psychiatrist from Zimbabwe who identified that there was only about 6 or 7 psychiatrists in all of Zimbabwe, and there was a lot of challenges around mental health, but not enough providers to provide the services. And so they worked with some grandmothers, and they identified that if they trained grandmothers to provide cognitive behavioral therapy and provided them the supports to do it, that might be an effective way to help make services more accessible for people who needed it. And so they put a bench outside of health centers. They provided that training and monitoring for those grandmothers to sit on this bench outside of the health centers for people to go and have sessions with the grandmothers on this friendship bench, they called it. And they found that it was able to reduce anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation in Zimbabwe. And so they've since scaled that project to other parts of Africa. There's now a friendship bench in the Bronx, and they're trying to bring it to Canada. They have a symbolic bench in Toronto at the Evergreen Brickworks to honor it. So those are the kinds of innovations done on the international scale. One of the other innovations that came from before we were at Grand Challenges was through a demonstration fund that was launched a few years ago, back in 2017. And this call was for Indigenous innovation. And there was a friendship center out in British Columbia that had a group of grandmothers that were wanting to do more gardening and to share their knowledge around gardening and plants with the community. So they got permission to use some property in a friendship center, or in a school that had closed down. And they started gardening there, and they got permission to use the grounds from this old school. They hired people who are usually hard to employ, people who had been in jail or maybe had challenges with substance misuse, people with mental health challenges. They hired that community to actually work the land and were able to give people employment, and they grew these plants and medicines. They packaged them up in a beautiful box and sold it at the airport as a high-end tea product, and were actually able to generate enough revenue that they wanted to reinvest it in the community. And so they looked at their whole process and decided that the screen printing was the most expensive part of their process. And so they bought a screen press, and they leveraged some of this kind of innovation demonstration fund funding to develop some training modules for youth on how to use a screen press. And they're actually quite a successful screen press operation on Vancouver Island. And these 2 social enterprises now have enough revenues that they've generated that they've now purchased a radio station and are working with Indigenous youth on Vancouver Island to train them on how to work in radio and radio media, which is pretty incredible if you think about a group of grannies who wanted to share their knowledge about gardening and traditional Indigenous plants in their region. So those are some of the ideas that have already been sparked that can hopefully inspire you to kind of see what the potential of this initiative is. We have our first programmatic money, and we just started this program. It's a 6-year initiative that started last October. We've been working towards it some time before. The Minister of the Department of Women and Gender Equality had announced it last June, but it took some time to actually get all of the application process in place. So we started last October with a program for Indigenous gender equality. And this initiative specifically is to advance Indigenous gender equality through innovation and social entrepreneurship. And the big piece to pay attention to is the innovation piece. Of course, this is an innovation platform, and that's the kind of the main goal that we have, is to support innovation and the social entrepreneurship piece by women. That's going to be by and for women, girls, and the Two-Spirit and gender diverse community. The successful applicants to this process will get seed funding grants of up to $250,000 to develop and test those innovative ideas or projects or enterprises. And again, that can be innovations across business, across technical, across health, across all those different sectors. But the main focus that we have is around the gender equality. And that can mean lots of things. So don't think, oh, I'm not an Indigenous woman, or I'm not a Two-Spirit or gender diverse or queer person, that they're not eligible. But it's actually to advance equality using a gender lens, and that can mean looking across lots of different spectrums. Who's making the decisions? What does the governance look like? How many people on the board are Indigenous women or gender diverse? What does who's hiring? Who's being hired for the initiative, and or who's the end beneficiary of that? And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So that's about Grand Challenges Canada and the Indigenous Innovation Initiative and this first round of seed funding that we are launching, or that we launched last week. And we're super excited to tell you all about. Now I'm going to launch into the application and selection process and tell you a little bit more about the details of this particular opportunity. So I talked a little bit about the gender lens piece. I'll go into that again in a minute, but just looking at what is Indigenous innovation. So Indigenous innovation is when some or all parts of a program, a product, or a process, or a service is designed and developed or invented by an Indigenous person or community, or it can be a unique modification of something that is currently existing. Now, this is by an Indigenous person or community, or it could be an innovation that's for an Indigenous person or community. But Indigenous innovation, it can transcend all of those different pieces. An Indigenous social enterprise. So for those of you who are familiar with social enterprises, is that in general, they're a business or a venture or a project that is aligned to do good for people in their communities. What we understand about Indigenous worldview on wealth is that wealth is measured quite differently in a Western context than it is in an Indigenous context. Wealth is often attributed to how much we can accumulate. And in an Indigenous context, we understand it more as wealth being an understanding of how much we can share. And so for Indigenous communities in general, the idea of a social enterprise is actually something that's very in keeping with the teachings that I've heard and what I've been hearing from the different stakeholders and networks and experts that I've been interacting with in this field. In terms of the gender lens piece, so just to be, again, clear on this piece, is that the application of a gender lens to this process is around looking at the practice, considering all of the different practices that can impact and influence gender or the gender roles of people in this process. We know that Indigenous women and Two-Spirit and queer and gender diverse individuals have some additional and distinct barriers when it comes to accessing different kinds of supports and resources, and their outcomes are often quite different as well. And that's not to say that the outcomes and the impacts are always more negative, but that they are quite distinct, and that that very often Indigenous women and Two-Spirit folks have more disadvantages and more barriers and challenges to overcome to get to the point when they can achieve success. we do also know that they have higher likelihoods of being resilient when they get to that point, and to be really key parts of their community in bringing up and lifting up their communities around them as well. So the opportunity and the potential of them is really quite phenomenal. And so applying a gender lens, again, it's not just around who is the lead, but it also could be around what does the governance look like? Is there equality from using a gender lens? Is there equality across the board of directors or the leadership, the senior leadership on a project? Who's making the decisions? Who is the innovation hiring or employing? And then also, who are the intended beneficiaries? Who is intended to benefit from this innovation, and how that comes across? So there's lots of different ways that anybody can be an applicant in this process. There are at least four key documents that I want to make sure that you are aware of. And they are all available on our website. Now, our website is just a landing page. We are working on a full website development, but you will see the pretty kind of orangey red coloring is the very top of our landing page on our new website. So that's what you'll see when you first click onto our website, which probably many of you have already been to at this point. And then if you scroll right down to the bottom, it gets to this kind of blue-green piece. And this is where you're going to find a lot of the documents that I'm referring to. So the eligibility quiz is in one of these white boxes, which has a link that you can link onto. So we have a quiz here that will help you to determine if you're eligible from a starting point for the application process. The request for proposals is a long document, and I apologize for how long it is. An RFP, some of you might know, is a legal document that lots of different specific information is required to have. And so it was the shortest possible version I could get for the RFP for this round. It is available in both languages, so English and French. And so you are able to find links to those at the bottom of this webpage. We also have frequently asked questions that have been kind of pre-populated, again, in English and in French, that you can access here. So please do have a look at those if you haven't already. And then we created a smaller version of the RFP for this first step, which gives the instructions on how to apply in that smaller first step. And so that document has less of the detail and also has a checklist at the end. And so that is a helpful document for you as well. The apply here is what Eric is going to go into in a little bit to talk about the Flux platform. In terms of the application and the selection process, we have a number of steps that you will flow through to getting to the point of being funded for this initiative. This is a competitive process, and we've worked to try and streamline it so that we have 2 steps so that people don't feel like they have to invest a ton of time for something that they have a very, that the chances of getting funded for might be lower. We heard from our Indigenous Gender Equality Reference Group that that was one of the big frustrations, is putting in applications and finding out that they didn't get funded, and how much time and effort goes into responding to RFPs and responding to grant applications. And so we wanted to streamline the process to try as much as we could to address only having to contribute to something if your chances, if your likelihood of getting funding was increased. We have had really incredible and exciting amount of interest in this initiative. It is a 6-year initiative, and so what I also want to highlight to you is that we have this round right now, but this is round 1, and we will have at least 4 rounds over the 6 years for funding. And so the opportunity, if you don't make it through either the step 1 expression of interest phase or even the full application phase, we're working to build resources and supports to help people to get their initiatives or their ideas more ready for subsequent rounds. But then also, if you're not ready right now, that we are going to be launching a subsequent round, hopefully in late 2020. So the first step is to submit your expression of interest. And I'll go a little bit more into detail on that in a little bit. We have a very tight timeline here because we wanted to get this process up and running as quickly as we could, but we just are not able to accept any late entries to this phase. And so they're due on Tuesday, June the 9th at noon sharp. And so your application has to be in before then. Once we have all of the expression of interests submitted, our team that we showed you at the beginning of the webinar are going to verify that you are eligible. So if you've made it through that eligibility quiz, then you're very likely to be eligible, but we'll be verifying that once we have all of the applications in. All of the ones that are eligible will then be assigned to a group of community innovation screen reviewers. At that innovation screen, each application or each expression of interest that is submitted will be reviewed by a community screener, or by at least 3 community screeners. They will be providing feedback, and we will be sharing that with every application, so that if you don't make it through this round, or even if you do, everyone will get that feedback to help inform their ideas to see if they have the potential to make it go further. The top 40 applicants from the expression of interest phase will be invited to submit full applications. And that phase will be open for 4 weeks. We call that step 2. And the reason that we've limited it to the top 40 is because we have a limited pool of funds for this process. And again, going back to the full application, what we heard from lots of people was that submitting a full application was incredibly time consuming and onerous. And if we had 200 applicants brought down to 40 applicants, you can imagine filling in that application at that stage will potentially give you a much better chance of being able to get funding from this initiative. Those applications will go to, again, another community review process. So we have a selection committee who will screen the top 40 applicants. And the selection committee is made up of, again, experts in Indigenous innovation, enterprises, social entrepreneurship, and have a grounding and understanding of Indigenous contexts across Canada. It's made up of our Indigenous Innovation Council and this group of experts that will evaluate each of them, and then they will meet for deliberations to review each of the full applications. That group will then work with will provide that list to the Indigenous Innovation Council, who will create a ranked list and make recommendation to the Grand Challenges Canada Board of Directors for approval. And then once we have approval from the board, we will notify each of the applicants from that top 40 step. And for those that are the successful applicants, we will begin that due diligence phase. And that's a phase that can be a bit more labor intensive. Now, In terms of Flux, so going back again down to the bottom of our website, there's another button. So the third of those 3 white buttons that you can click on is the Apply Here phase, and that will link you directly to our Flux platform. And you can also just put it into your browser, the website that is there, and also access the support that the platform has as well. And Eric's going to come on here now to talk through some of those pieces. Now, I'm presuming I need to stop sharing my screen here at this point.
Hi, Eric. You can share your screen now.
So hi everyone. I'll just give you a quick run through of how you can create an account on our Flux platform and submit an application or an expression of interest, sorry. There's a couple ways to get to our Flux platform. First, and possibly easiest, is just click on this big white Apply Here button, which will take you to our login or account creation page. Or if you don't want to have to navigate all the way to there, you can just go to this gcc.flux with 2 x's.io, and that'll take you to here as well. So if you don't already have an account, then you'll go to this Create an Account Now button and click on that. Have to enter in some basic information about yourself. Sort of primary importance are, of course, email and name. Yeah, as you're probably aware, anything that is bolded is something that is mandatory. Other things like any salutations or middle names or anything like that is optional. For the nationality section, because Grand Challenges does provide funding for organizations all around the country, we have a large list of countries here, and so you just need to find Canada, or if you have other nationalities, like if you're an American or you're from the Channel Islands, I don't even know where that is, then you can select those, and you can select multiple nationalities if you need to. Also important is preferred language of correspondence, just so that you get the correct language showing up when you log into Flux. And then also some basic information about your organization. You put in legal name, public name, and some basic address information. If you want to be added to the Grand Challenges mailing list, you can select that here. Defaults to no, but it's a good way of keeping in touch and keeping apprised of other funding opportunities that may come up. And then you'll click this Submit Request button. It's giving me an error message because I haven't filled anything out, but that'll submit the request. It needs to be manually reviewed and approved by somebody at Grand Challenges, and that will usually happen same day, but it might be a day or two, usually same day though. When it is approved, you'll get an email back saying that your account's been created, and you'll have a username and a link to generate a password. And you just need to go in there. Say password and password set, and then you just log in. And when you log in, you'll arrive on sort of a landing page that has all of the current funding opportunities that Grand Challenges has open, all the RFPs. The second one down is the Indigenous Innovation Initiative, and you'll just click this nice, lovely green button here. and that will generate a expression of interest for you. And you fill out the information here. It's very short. I think it's something like 15 questions. Provide a short summary of your innovation, what the problem addressed by it is, proposed innovation, and what are the current approaches to the problem, how will your innovation address it more effectively. There's an opportunity here to attach supplementary files if you've got like photos of your initiative in action, if it's already underway and you're looking to scale it up, or if you have additional like promotional materials or just background information, you can add it by clicking on this blue Add Document button, and then you can just add files and put in whatever you need to put in. Once you have, at any point in the process, you can click on the little save button and it'll save your progress so far, and then you can go in and edit it again. So if you saved it and you want to edit it again, the edit button is up here in the top right. If you want to make a paper copy, just hit the little print button up here. Once you have filled everything out, click the green submit button. You can add a note here if you want. That doesn't really impact anything too much, but if you feel like you need to, that's fine. And then you hit OK. It's giving me an error message because I haven't filled out any of the mandatory fields, but once you have filled them out, then you won't get that error message, and it will just submit it. And you'll get a confirmation email, and you'll be on the application process. I saw somebody mention in chat that the date up here said June 8th. I've updated it to make it explicitly noon EST on June 9th. So that should, we'll update this one as well. But yeah, so it's June 9th. And I know, if you do have any issues with this, if something's not working, or if just having some issues, you can submit a help ticket at by going to grandchallenges.ca/flux-support, entering your information here and the description of what is causing an issue, and I'll be able to help you out. Or you can also just email fluxsupport@grandchallenges.ca, and that'll come to me as well. And that is about it, I think. So I will toss it back to Sarah.
Sorry, it takes me a couple seconds to unmute on it.
All right, I'm back. Okay. Thanks, Eric, for that. Eric, your audio was cutting in and out, but I hope that people got the gist of working through that process. I think the main kind of pieces are that the Grand Challenges website is also a kind of a useful tool. At the bottom of the Grand Challenges Canada website is a link directly to Flux support, which will be messages that go directly to Eric, or you can email him at that URL that you saw in the messages. And it's also listed in our RFP instructions. There's a description in the RFP, if you haven't seen it already, in one of the appendixes that we have instructions for how to use Flex as well. And so with all of those pieces and support from us, if you are having any problems, please do reach out. The big piece is that, as you heard, they need to be manually approved before the registration is processed. And so get this step done sooner than later so that you're in. Yes, you can save your process and come back to it at another time. Once you have a login, you can get back into it. But leaving it to the last minute could be a bit of a risk. I'll go into the actual questions that were in the application specifically shortly. All right, let me share my screen again. All right, everyone's good? So now I just want to go into some more of the details for the actual application. And I realize that we're getting on there with time and I want to leave some time for the questions at the end. We have developed a challenge statement. So if you haven't seen this already, this is what we're looking for, is innovations that are, so we're looking for bold ideas that will advance equality for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples across Canada. The approaches must be grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing, and they have to apply a gender lens. So again, that's that piece where it's not that the project itself has to be a gender-based project, but it could be that it's led by Indigenous women or gender diverse person. It could be that there's considerations across the governance and leadership. It could be who is hiring, or it could be who the end beneficiary is. Projects, however, that are led by Indigenous women and Two-Spirit, queer and gender diverse innovators will be given priority. And so a minimum of half of our projects will be Indigenous women or Two-Spirit led. In terms of the expression of interest itself, we've tried to keep this into a nice small kind of package, but still make sure that we get enough information so that you can really tell us about your really wonderful idea. And so you will be asked to provide a short summary to what your project is, or what your innovation is. The three key questions are: what is the problem being addressed by your innovation, and giving us some specific context or details about what you're proposing, why there's a challenge. What is the challenge in your community you're hoping to solve? What is your proposed innovation is question number 2. So tell us about what your idea is. And then the third is, why is it that the current approaches to address this challenge that you've identified are not being addressed effectively with what's happening? So why is the status quo not enough? Why does this need to happen? We all know that the status quo is inefficient, and that there's a lot of opportunity out there. Eligibility is the one piece where we've had the most questions so far that have come in. So the projects must be led by an Indigenous organization. Now, an organization can mean lots of different things, and I'll go into that in a second. But it also could mean that it could be in a meaningful partnership with an Indigenous community or with Indigenous people. And so the lead applicant organization, the legal organization, could be providing that kind of strategic partnership to the Indigenous community or Indigenous innovator. There is a further write-up about what a meaningful partnership means. If you look at the statement on identity, it will speak a little bit more to that and what our intentions are around that. The proposals that are led by Indigenous women and Two-Spirit LGBT plus innovators will be given priority, as I discussed earlier. And then in terms of the eligible organizations, they can be Canadian not-for-profit corporations, partnerships, associations, and trusts. They can be for-profit corporations, partnerships, sole proprietorships, associations, and trusts. Now, this is the one where it gets tricky. If the nature of the funded activity is non-commercial and not intended to generate profit, I'm going to speak to that in a second. And the third one is that Indigenous governments, including band councils and tribal councils, self-governments, and other agencies, however you locate your organization, it must be located within Canada. This funding is provided by the Government of Canada for Indigenous peoples in Canada, and so the organization must be located within Canada. We may at some point expand to be able to fund Indigenous innovation outside of Canada, but we're not at that point yet. We're not able to fund individuals. And by individuals, that means that if you have a great idea, but you are not yet registered as a sole proprietor or a partnership, or you haven't not incorporated, then you would not be eligible to apply. We cannot give funding to an individual person. Layla has some information that she's going to put into the text or into the chat section around registering as a sole proprietor. In Ontario, I believe the cost is about $60 to register a business as a partnership or a sole proprietorship. It costs a different amount in different provinces. Apparently it's $40 in British Columbia. But yes, we cannot fund individuals. So if you want to be deemed eligible, you do have to register. And that's because it's the part of the terms and agreements of our funding partner, the Department of Women and Gender Equality. The other piece that has come up is the commercial activities or activities intended to generate profit. And so I wanted to highlight that if you are a for-profit business, and we can't fund the commercial activities intended to generate profit, I just want to kind of go back to the idea that we're an innovation platform. This is to develop and test innovation. And the intention is not to just ramp up. At this stage, the intention is not just to ramp up innovative businesses, but to actually develop and test new innovations. I want to speak a little bit to how this is, I want to do this carefully to make sure I'm not creating more confusion, but there is a difference between generating a profit and generating revenue. And the activities are not excluded from generating wealth, but that the business model is that it's a social enterprise that reinvests in Indigenous community.
Great. We're also getting the question if, 1 second, if we work with all provinces of Canada.
So this initiative is across Canada, across urban, rural, remote, northern communities, anywhere across Canada. And it is across Inuit, First Nations, and Métis identities.
Great. And someone asked if there are any areas or sectors that we will not fund, for example, cannabis.
I haven't been told to not fund cannabis. If it's innovative, it's a social entrepreneurship, if it's advancing Indigenous gender equality, then it would be eligible if it meets all the other eligibility criteria. We have some firm principles that we uphold. So as the Indigenous Innovation Initiative, our guidance from the Indigenous leadership that we have has said that we uphold principles of honoring Indigenous ways of knowing and doing, in honoring Indigenous laws and protocols, and in honoring the land. And so those are the guiding principles that we have. And if those things are breaching those core principles that we have, then that is embedded within, you will see within the RFP. So those would likely not get selected.
Another question is, because of COVID-19, there's going to be some challenges regarding project design and budget. Are there any allowances for these challenges?
So you will be designing the project budgets. If you think that your innovative idea is not going to work in a COVID environment, then it might make sense for you to wait until a subsequent round. We will be paying attention. We don't know what's, like when we go through this review process with our full applicants, we don't know what the COVID world is going to look like quite yet. Things are changing day by day, week by week, month by month. But we will be mindful to whether your project has a likelihood of being able to be implemented at the time that we will be able to offer you that funding. And so you will define what the budget will be. And if you want to dedicate funds to COVID adaptations, then we will work with you to do that. But if you think that COVID restrictions will not allow you to actually implement in our timelines, then we will not be able to just fund you for developing the idea, but then not being able to test it. We need to be able to have that full kind of piece. And so be mindful of COVID and how your innovation will work in our post-COVID world.
I think that we pretty much covered all the questions regarding eligibility, and some people were asking if they can ask their questions at another time or get support. So I just want to remind them that we'll be here on Wednesdays at noon. They also, they've been asking if they can get help, if there'll be anyone specific at I3. So I think that that's the right place for you guys to go, is on Wednesdays at noon. A question regarding the application is, when it comes to the complementary documents, like the videos or the PDF that they can upload, is this meant to be content that's directly produced in response to the RFP? Or can they post existing information that they have done to date?
Yes, you can post existing theses. If you've already been working on this or you have samples of things that are public, then you can submit those to us as part of this. Please do not submit unregistered intellectual property. We are asking everyone to sign confidentiality agreements, but anything you bring into us is discoverable. So please don't send us your patents if you have patents. That's not what we're looking for in this phase. But if you have a short video, or if you want to actually do you can do like a curated new video that just speaks to your application, that helps to inspire us to really get at what the passion is behind your innovation, then you can submit those. If you have a pre-developed pitch deck that you're really proud of, or that's been working, already to kind of share your idea, then you can submit that. If you have, small YouTube clips, we can't take extensive amounts of information because we have a volunteer group of reviewers who are, not going to be able to watch, 1 hour documentaries and successfully get through this review process. And so we'll only watch the first 5 minutes, or the 5 minutes, or I can't remember if it's 3 minutes or 5 minutes. It says in the RFP, we'll only watch that amount that you direct us to watch if it's longer. But the idea is that we want to be able to accept that not everyone works best in a written form, and that if you have supplementary pieces that can highlight your innovation in a way that words can't, then please submit those to us. Sometimes pictures tell 1,000 words.
Yes, we also got asked if the expression of interest is part of the form to be completed on Flux.
So yes, the 4 questions, right? The summary and then those 3 questions is in Flux. And so we've posted them in the RFP and in the instructions so that you can see them and anticipate them and start thinking about them and get them ready. And you have that external version, but those are the exact questions that are in Flux that you will be answering. And it's just those 3 questions and a short summary. And we've put character limits on it so that the whole application is less than 3 pages. So you're going to need to choose your words carefully, and you might need to do some editing and crafting. And we're not doing editing. We will support you with the process, but work together, work with your networks to give us something that's really inspiring. But it shouldn't be too long an investment in terms of having big applications that we're bringing in. We did hear, like I said, really clearly that people didn't want to fill out large applications to find out that they had a 1 in 250 chance of getting funded. So we've tried to streamline that process to make it more simple. And then if you have a great idea, but it's just not quite at that point, we want to really support you to develop those ideas so that we can get them ready for the next round. We're trying to spark that next generation of innovation.
Yeah, and we got a couple questions regarding what, asking what costs are allowed, right, to be covered. Someone asked about capital purchases, and another person asked about extended learning, professional consultant fees, and someone talked about a space, like a space.
So the space is an innovation. The eligible costs will work with our with folks at step 2 to fund to look at the specific kind of eligible costs, and there'll be a strong outline in that kind of instruction package for step 2. We can't fund capital development. It's not enough money, to be quite honest, to fund capital development and space and you know, the purchase of land and pieces, but we can fund items like if you need a computer or laptop to run your innovation, if you need or for your staff, like for the staff to run this project itself, we can work with those pieces, but not to buy land or to buy space. The cost should be attributed to the innovation development and testing.
And they're asking if the project phase can generate a profit as long as it's designed to be put back into the project development.
Yes, yes. If you are generating a profit, then it needs to be invested back into either to the project itself or to the community during the project cycle. And again, this doesn't mean it can't be revenue generating. We're looking like for this early stage innovation, we're looking to develop the next big ideas that will become the Indigenous businesses and get investment ready to meet up with the venture capitals and the other kind of economic development investors out in the field. This is one of the neat things about what we can do, is that this is to develop and test ideas. You might have a great idea and then we develop it and we test it with you, but it doesn't work. We're okay with it not working. If we don't have a certain number of the projects that don't work, that means we're not taking enough risk to get at those really bold ideas. We're not looking for the safe option. We're looking for the bold ideas that have the potential to have a huge impact. And to be able to scale them, to make them available for other communities, for other nations, to become exports. Those are the ideas that we're looking for. The bolder the idea, the better. We want to see that it has the potential to actually work, but that we can actually test it and implement it. But if it doesn't work, then that's okay. This is not, you don't have to repay this back. This is a grant to develop and test ideas. It's about innovation.
I think that's a great point, because that's very different from most funding out there. So thank you for explaining that. Someone asked if there'll be an introduction of general and proper use of gender terminology.
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, will there be any introduction of general and proper use of the gender terminology? And I'm afraid this person thinks that they have to express themselves in a certain way for the application. That's how I'm interpreting it, but I'm not sure.
So we are trying to be as inclusive as we can. I myself, I am in a process of learning and trying to be as open and inclusive to expressions of gender and sexuality as I can in my own understanding, and I'm open to learning. And so please, if you have feedback around how we've tried to open up the inclusiveness of this, then we are very open to hearing it. This is the information that we have thus far. There are some pieces that you may see out there that we have directions specifically for how the government has worked to locate the acronyms or the locations. We know that not everyone locates as either Two-Spirit or across that, that gender spectrum that is in the acronyms. That was the intention of adding the plus sign, was to recognize that people locate how they locate, and we want to use those words that come from you. And so if I've offended anyone, I apologize. We are trying to be as inclusive and open as we can to expressions of that gender and sexual orientation expressions.
Great. And they're asking if we can guide and support them through the process of starting their own business.
So part of what we're trying to do is support people through this process. So for those successful applicants, then absolutely, it's not just throwing some capital funding at somebody who's got a great idea to develop and test it. We will provide the supports as well and help support them to be networked within a larger kind of innovation community, and then helping them to link into the different kinds of resources and supports as well that exist. And we are working to potentially develop some curated modules specifically around advancing Indigenous innovation, or not advancing, but to develop Indigenous innovation, and getting businesses ready through incubator, accelerator type modules that are specific to Indigenous innovation. So we will be supporting for sure the funded projects, but also working with those ideas and those folks with really great ideas, but are not quite fundable, not quite at the point where they got funded, to help them to just advance them that bit more so that they're more ready for subsequent rounds.
Thank you. And there's a couple of questions that might be more for Eric. So I wonder if he's still around, if he's comfortable with using at least the voice, or if not, Eric, you can just type it on the chat box and I will read it out loud. They're asking if you can start and stop the application, if they can save it and go back to it later.
You might need to unmute him.
Oh, yes. You have been unmuted, Eric.
Can you repeat the question?
They're asking if Flux allows them to start and stop the application, if they can save it and go back to it later.
Absolutely. When you are filling out the application, there's a save button in the bottom right corner. And then when you go back into Flux, when you log back in, there's a drafts link on the left-hand side. And you can just click on that to access your draft and go back to editing it.
Thank you, Eric. And this one, I think it might be, it's also about registering, but it might be more for Sarah. They're asking if they should still register if they're not meaning to apply for this round.
My guess, Eric, is that there's no harm in registering at this round, and that then you would have a registration user ID and password for a subsequent round that gets opened up.
Yeah, there's no harm in creating an account now, and then if you don't end up applying for this round of funding, then yeah, like you said, then you have an account set up and you can just log in or use the forgot password link to apply for next round or for a different funding opportunity that we might have open at some point.
Oh, and another question for you, Sarah, that I see it's coming up on the chat box is, can they apply again? Can they reapply after they apply the first time?
Yes, and Marissa, you might be more familiar with this, but you can apply again. You can apply for more than one project, but you have to have different leads.
Mm-hmm.
But you can be on the team for different projects. And yes, you can apply in subsequent rounds, of course. So if you apply this round, and even if you are successful, if you have another innovative idea and you want to apply in a subsequent round, you can certainly apply.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Marissa also offered more details regarding the video size limit in case anyone's interested in the chat box. And they asked if when they register for the first step, they have to provide a business or organization name, if they have to use the same name to apply to the second step. Can they change the name? I'm guessing this person may not have an organization set up and they're wondering if they can change the name throughout the application.
Yeah, the organization name can be changed after the fact. You'll need to email Grand Challenges staff member, do it just so that if there's any concerns about how that might impact their application process or anything like that, it can be addressed.
Thank you.
So that's something that, so my understanding, because Eric, you cut in and out again, but just to answer that question about whether you can change your organizational name, the answer is yes, but you would need staff support to go through that process and do it behind on the platform behind the scenes.
Great. And the last question I can find that we haven't covered, and I apologize if I missed anything, there's been quite a bit, is with the costs that are eligible, if they can supplement their income during the project.
So salaries is something that would be an eligible expense.
Great. Great. I believe that is all the questions we have, and Pierce very kindly posted the link. I'm going to repost it in case anyone's interested to be part of our mailing list. We need you to sign up, and the link is in the chat box. And thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope everyone has a wonderful week. And I look forward to I really look forward to seeing all these great ideas come into our inbox as people apply. So reach out if you have any other questions. Chimagwech, everyone.
Thank you for the supportive messages and for participating.